you know, we were handed these sheets last week at the at the advisory committee, and quite frankly, I am disappointed to see such high levy increases. The reason I say that is because all year we've received reports, and I guess Marlene or you know, we got different programs throughout the year. Oh, this is 100% funding. We got extra money for the smoke-free. It's 100% funding. And here we are looking at well, the program-based grants is up 20%. Well, I guess I'm reading that right. And then I kind of agree with Councillor Height. We're sitting at 16.7 on the over, like, you know, it's last year, if I remember right, we started off about 15 and ended up at 10 or in terms of the levy increase here. And I do recall one thing, and that is that the province, correct me if I'm wrong, was that last year they cut our grant back substantially. When we looked at all 36 health units, we were slightly funded above where we were supposed to be. Am I correct on that in 2016?
Through the mayor to Councillor Brunton, actually, if I could just clarify, with a reallocation across the province with the funding formula, as I stated earlier, that was implemented in 2015, we've been pretty much capped. We're at that special line that we're not really receiving any additional, and but we're not being have any budget or funding reduction. So we've been basically status quo, and our funding envelope has pretty much been stagnant since 2014. And yet, as you're well aware, we continue to have economic increases as approved by council and the board strictly because of our collective agreements. So that's the why you continue to see some increases outside of the medical officer of health. That's our biggest driver is that we continue to increase staff salaries as required, but our funding envelope has stayed static. We have received some additional one-time grants and some other fundings, but with some of those, we've added services or we've added FTE. So although we've gotten 100% funding, for example, the harm reduction, it wasn't to offset some of those other deficits. It was simply to add new services as we move forward.
Well, again, and I look back where we were told when we hired that .5 smoking officer, I guess there, a month or two ago, we were told that was 100% funded. Now I look at the budget and I see a 20% increase. You know, it's like if they're going to freeze our grants, I keep saying we do the best we can with the money they give us. And to say that maybe it's time to say, well, we'll get rid of the smoking program and say we don't want to do it. It's not worth our time. It's costing us too much money. Because someplace in the line, 20% of the cost to run those programs is coming to the taxpayer, not from the province. Thank you.
Mr. Black, through you to staff. What if I've been hearing something about restructuring and that the health unit programs would be going uploaded to the province? Is that happening?
So through the mayor to Councillor Black, there was an expert panel that was appointed by the minister, and we did receive the recommendations earlier on, and we provided feedback to Minister Hoskins. That has been sitting with the minister since that time, and we have not heard anything. So at this point in time, we are proceeding as status quo, and we're proceeding with significant budget asks as directed by the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. So we're, the minister could accept those recommendations, the minister could do nothing with them, or come back with some partial hybrid version of what those recommendations are. And we actually have heard absolutely nothing since that time.
Would it include all of the stuff in the Board of Health, or just some of or all of?
So through the mayor to Councillor Black, it would include all of and only public health, so the budget before you currently.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything further? Mr. Height? Thank you, Mayor Luke. I guess earlier, Councillor Black must have touched on the merging of the health units in Ontario. I think that's what you were speaking with, because, like, isn't it St. Thomas, Elgin, Oxford, they all merged theirs, and they're very happy to do so.
So through the mayor to Councillor Height, so those are actually two separate things. So the one that I just spoke to was the expert panel that was advised by Minister Hoskins. Elgin, St. Thomas, and Oxford have self-selected to proceed with a merger, which has been approved through the legislator and which will be completed in May of 2018. That was self-selection, has no correlation at this point in time to that expert panel. You may have seen in the news that I believe Huron and Perth are going down that similar path. But again, that was something that they had been considering even before the expert panel, and is not a direct impact or a direct correlation with the expert panel.
Okay, but I don't understand how you and your team recommend not to do that, where these other municipalities are doing it, and the Oxford Elgin people are just giddy about this whole merger.
So through the mayor to Councillor Height, it's not that we're not recommending, it's just not something that we've had that discussion, and that discussion would have to be a discussion with the respective board and taken direction from this board. Would also have to be something done in consultation with Brant. As you will recall from the feedback that the board provided to the minister through that expert panel consultation, there are significant impacts for this particular Board of Health being embedded within Norfolk County to Norfolk County. It would mean that 10% of our workforce, which supplement some of our other departments, would be removed from the county. So it's a little bit different, and each health unit across the province is a little bit different. We would have to have some much further conversations if that was the direction or the desire of the board to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I do remember that part of the conversation, and I'm looking forward to those discussions. Like right now, I feel when the province funds us something 100% and we go over that 100%, we're asking Norfolk County taxpayers to pay twice for that same service. So are we doing anybody a favor by asking them to pay double for one standard service? I don't think we are, Mr. Mayor. But with that, I'm going to move the motion that we ask our staff to come back and give us the ramifications on what it would be for a 6.7% cut. This still gives them a 10% increase, and a 10% increase to me is massive. I don't think anyone here at council would go back to any one of our constituents and ask them for a 10% increase. And here we are being asked by this board for 16.7. You know, and I think at least we'll get a report back tomorrow. We can make an informed decision on some services that we feel that are worthwhile to pay double for or not.
So your motion is that the health unit budget be cut by 6, asking staff for a 6.7 reduction overall?
Well, we need a report, Mr. Mayor. That's what I would like to see on what services or what options we have as council to get it down to a mere 10% increase.
Do you want to word your motion for me, please?
I guess that staff be directed to provide council a report with options or ramifications of a 6.7% reduction in the Haldeman Norfolk Health Unit operating budget.
Is there a seconder for Mr. Height's motion? Mr. Brunton? Be right with you there. Just give me a second. So I have it straight, staff be directed to provide a report for the Board of Health with options and ramifications of a decrease of 6.7 in the Haldeman Norfolk Health Unit budget. Speaking to the motion, Councillor Broughton, or Mr. Broughton?
Well, first of all, if I wanted to go back before I speak, can I ask the question, like, Brant County, are they on their own, Marlene? Or do they buckle, or are they in cahoots with the city of Brantford?
So through the mayor to Councillor Brunton, they are an autonomous board serving both Brant and Brant County.
Well, when you say Brant, the city of Brantford?
Yes.
City of Brantford and Brant County, so they have one medical officer of health, am I right?
Through the mayor to Councillor Height, they currently have 0.5, as we do. They will be futuristically moving towards a 0.8 once their audit is complete.
Okay, and is that, I guess, like you mentioned, these other municipalities, or Councillor Height did, about amalgamation. Is that something, like if we were to amalgamate with Brant County and Brantford, would one officer, medical officer of health be suffice?
Through the mayor to Councillor Brunton, I can't speak specifically for the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, but I would suggest that that would probably be the reality.
Well, it's interesting. I guess it's certainly something that never crossed my mind, but going back to the motion, if I may, Mayor Luke.
Yes, you may.
You know, I just, and I know what it is, and I know you said our grant, or funding from the province has been stagnant. And that tells me that either we are providing too much, or the province are not funding us enough. And to me, I don't think it's out of line for us to, like you referred to, I think I read in there we got 3.9 working in the smoking program, and we spend about 400,000 in that range. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. And maybe we don't have to put the student in the store or into the variety stores where he is underage and see if he can buy cigarettes, or we don't have to go in every high school. I mean, if people want to smoke, God only knows, let them smoke. And next thing you know, we're going to be smoking marijuana or whatever. So and we'll get more money for that, I assume, but probably not enough to fund the program the way things are going. I don't know. The whole thing doesn't make sense, and I'm going to support Councillor Height's motion. Someplace we have to say enough's enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan, did you have a comment related to the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I did. I wanted to clarify the intent of the board to whether or not the reduction that was being requested relates to the overall budget, the levy impact, or the Norfolk County levy, because all three are quite different.
Your thoughts, Councillor Hyde? That's a good question, because
Overall
obviously
budget, Mr. Mayor.
the overall, and that way it'll be portioned both Haldeman and Norfolk if it's come to be. So the overall proposed budget.
I believe it works roughly out to $113,420.
So it's the 375 that you're looking at, the 6.7 reduction in that figure? Gotcha, thank you. Further to this motion, stick to the motion, please. Sonnenberg and Oliver, please.
Thank you. What the motion suggests is pretty extensive. I'm wondering what the timeline might be here. Is Councillor Height expecting staff to get back with different figures by the end of tomorrow, or sometime in the future, or what's the intent here?
I'm free for the rest of the week, Mr. Mayor, and Monday and Tuesday if I have to as well. So I'm good if they can come back tomorrow, if they come back Friday. Either that or we'll move the motion and they can come back next year.
Comment?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we'll be back tomorrow with those numbers.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Oliver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman of the board. I'm not at all clear I understand when Councillor Height said overall budget. Like if you look at the exact wording of his motion, he's suggesting a 6.7% reduction in the overall health unit budget. No, net levy requirement? Okay, the net levy requirement currently being 2,616,000. Is that correct? Or just of the increase, a 6.7% reduction? Again, I need, in fact, the wording of the motion I don't think is clear, so I want it read again, if you don't mind.
I can simplify it to dollar amount if you want, Mr. Mayor. It's $113,420 is what I'm looking for to be cut out of the $9.467,100 budget. So that's $9.4 million. I'm looking for staff to come back with some options to cut $113,420 out of it.
Then that would not be levy, that would be overall cost.
Really, like I'm going off the percentage of the levy. It's coming in at 16.7. I'd like to see it come in at 10%. Wherever staff can find it, I'll leave them that option.
So you want, if I may, I'm looking at page 2, net levy
Yep.
requirement for 2018, the increase is $375,100. And that is a
16%.
16.7% increase over the previous budget, and you want that to be reduced to reduce it down to 10% at 375, correct? Okay.
Good.
Any other discussion? Okay, I'm going to ask the deputy clerk to read the motion again so I can hear it and make sure that Mr. Height is in agreement.
Through the chair, I have that Board Member Height moved and Board Member Brunton seconded, that staff be directed to provide the board with a report on options for and ramifications of a 6.7% reduction from the overall 2018 net levy requirement.
Net levy increase, not requirement.
Net levy increase.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Height, just before I go to council, so to Mr. Wells, and again, I just want to be clear here before we call the motion. The 375,000 is 16.7% increase of the 2.6 million, correct? So I'm going to go to James in a moment before Mr. Wells. So really, we're looking at decreasing, or only increasing the 2.6 million by, instead of 375, it would be 261,000 and change. Mr. James, Mr. Johnson, James, am I getting this correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if we wanted to have an exact 10% increase, our calculations are 150,930. So that would be, the 2018 levy would be 2,465,870 in order to get the 10% that Councillor Height is looking for.
And the savings would be the difference again?
Savings would be $150,930.
$30. I got it finally. Thank you for your patience. Mr. Wells.
Mr. Mayor, this would be a question to staff.
Please.
First of all, if they understand what the motion is, and secondly, is it doable?
So I'll start and I'll let Ms. Taylor add, and/or Michael, if I may. So through the chair to Councillor Wells, I just respectfully remind Council that 150 off the levy, I think we now understand what you're asking, has compounding factors because of the funding and because of the shared services. So the 150 would be between both counties. So for us to realize those savings, we're looking at significant cuts in staffing and services services. We will do our best to bring something forward for tomorrow if that is the desire of the board. However, we can't commit to that because it's not just a straight reduction of 150 and reducing an FTE such as an NBI, et cetera. We have to go down into all the cost sharing. And as my simple example from earlier, in this particular model of cost sharing of 75-25, for us to realize $1,000 of savings, we actually have to reduce our budget probably close to $7,000 for every 1,000, just as a simple example. So it's a lot more complicated and compounding than just doing the reduction of 150. And I will respectfully just say that staff has done everything we can with having no increases over the last several years. And again, very optimistic that we will realize some increases in 2018, but can't provide them today.
Okay. Anything further to the motion? Mr. Height?
Mayor Luke, I don't understand. How can staff say this is the best they can do with a 16.7% increase coming in here? If that's the best they can do, maybe we need to look at someone to actually go down and do a service review in this department. To come in at 16.7% in anything, it's way too high. Well, what was happening before that it's fallen apart to get to this point? What I'm looking for in this motion is options. Okay? Yeah, we can make the cuts right now, and they would have to do it. That's not what I'm looking for here. But if our staff are unable to, where do we go from there? We've already had the audit. At some point in time, we all have to work together and make some cuts for the right thing for the taxpayers. This whole, back and forth isn't really getting anybody anywhere.
Arlene?
If I may, Mr. Mayor, I'll just direct the board to the 2018 adjusted budget. And if you look down that column, the increase is actually 2.1%, which equates to 88,000. So that's the increase staff have proposing to move forward, recognizing that our biggest driver is our collective agreement. So, despite the percentage, the actual ask, I would suggest is not huge on this high level of a budget of $10 million.
It's still that overall summary page.
Okay.
She's saying before the...
Any further debate, comments, questions to this motion before us?
Right here, Mike.
All right. Deputy Clerk, would you read it one last time for me, please? I just want to hear the wording again.
Sure. Through the chair, moved by Board Member Height, seconded by Board Member Brunton, that staff be directed to provide the board with a report on options for and ramifications of a 6.7% reduction from the overall 2018 proposed net levy increase, which totals a potential overall savings of $150,930.
Mr. Wells?
The vote is taken, Mr. Mayor. I recognize we serve as the Board of Health. I understand that. I would ask staff, however, has this budget gone to Haldeman, and have they received any feedback at all?
Arlene?
So through the mayor to Councillor Wells, thank you for the question. For the first time, actually, we did sit down with staff advisory. Although it being late in the process, they have reviewed it. They did take it to SMT and have not come back with any reductions for us or any recommendations at this point in time. We will be going back to SMT and we will be going back to Haldeman just to review the budgets with them and answer any of their questions. And both the advisory has seen it for the first time, as well as you're well aware as a committee member.
Thank you. And Mr. Johnson, a question from me. The motion mentions a savings potential of savings of $150,930, and that portion would be split between the two counties 60-40, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, you are correct.
Yes, so Norfolk savings then would be $90,558 is my calculation. Mr. Black?
Thank you, Mayor Luke, and through you to Marlene. I think you might have touched on it, but I still don't quite understand, why are the interdepartmental charges $770,000 higher than last year?
So through the mayor to Councillor Black, we have touched on it, but I know it's quite complicated, and staff had to work through that and the presentation. So the presentation, I appreciate, is less than ideal. So as you are aware, we did realign all of the QPAP, and so staff were removed from public health from an FTE perspective into the QPAP. However, then they were interdepartmentally charged back in because of the funding, because they need to sit in their respective funding envelopes. So the interdepartmental charges, as we know them for HR, IT, are still there, but in concert with that, you also have the salaries and benefits of, I believe it's 7.5 FTEs that are interdepartmentally charged back. So it's the salaries and benefits for those FTEs. As you'll recall from my previous comment, there was a realignment, no added FTEs, but they're showing up here. So instead of showing up in the salaries and benefits, if I may, they're showing up in the interdepartmental charges. And I'm not sure if our finance team wants to add to that, as they assisted us in the presentation of that.
Okay. So, Ed, thank you for that. But if that didn't happen, so then that 770 would have showed up in salary and benefits. That would have been over $1 million increase on salary and benefits then, right?
I'm going to have to defer to the finance people, if I may, either Michael or James.
So it's not an in and out. It's just a sort of reshuffling the program. So in some respects with interdepartmental charges, you'll see it show up here, but disappear someplace else for an overall net zero. But in this case, it's just from inside the department, shifting from salaries and benefits to interdepartmental charges. So if it didn't happen, it would have had to show up in salaries and benefits, which would have been over $1 million increase.
Yeah.
Is that right?
So through the chair to Councillor Black, it is, if I give you an approximation, it would be, we have the 2% increase on salaries and benefits, and then it's about 400,000 or so that went to the QPAP department. So if you were to add that back into salaries and benefits, then yes, you would be at a positive 2 to 3% increase.
Right, thank you.
And before I get to the question, just again, one last question, I promise. Marlene, what I am getting, I believe, from this discussion, if we were to eliminate, this motion was to pass and eliminates roughly $150,000 from our levy portion, the bulk of that is in the 75-25 for services we provide. Is that true?
That is correct.
So what we're really doing overall then would be saving from the levy of Haldeman and Norfolk $150,000, but it would affect $600,000 of services, 450 being the 75% and 25% the local levy, correct?
I'm not sure if that's the exact number, but
roughly.
That is
That's-
exactly what we're looking
okay,
at, is
no.
the compounding factor, and probably around the $600 in
Yes,
services. And quite honestly, we have reduced all of the uncontrollables as far as materials and supplies and services. We're looking at service reductions, and FTE reductions is what we're looking at.
Mr. Brunton, again to the motion, please.
Well, just if you look on that page 6 for reference, you look at the federal provincial grants.
Yes.
For 2018, 5.480 million, right? The tax levy requirement is almost half, not far off half of that. So nothing's being subsidized at 75 or 100%. The grant, our levy is 24, 22. So we're about 50% funding on all the programs, plain and simple.
So Through the mayor to Councillor Breton, staff and between public health and finance actually did a very detailed review of line by line. And after many discussions at this board table, there was a concern of 100% not being funded 100%. So we've actually reallocated and realigned so that 100% programs are truly being funded 100%. And so the costs are all in the cost shared. And yes, we all are aware they're not 75-25. They're at about 70-30 approximately in the cost share component of this. And again, I'll remind you that there is a recognition by the Ministry of that, and we are putting in a substantial grant to offset some of that. And although we know we potentially won't realize all of that, we are very optimistic that there will be some of that. In speaking to what Mayor Luke has suggested, 150 reduction at this point would be probably well over $600,000 in service reductions that we would bring forward for your consideration.
Well, I'm certainly willing to look at that, but and I'm not blaming you, Marlene, or your staff. I'll say it one more time. It's the province are not funding us enough, or we're trying to do too much. Thank you.
Mr. Oliver?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just so I'm clear, should this motion fail, and I understand where Councillor Height's coming from in looking for possible cost savings, should this motion fail and then another motion come forward relative to the new public health inspector position, which is identified in our budget as, although it's annualized, but roughly $103,000 cost to the budget, totally funded from levy, both us and Haldeman, as an alternative. It achieves, for us, not as much of a levy saving as what Councillor Height's motion was, but would achieve some, and perhaps again send a message to the province that it needs to be cost sharing on a new thing like a new position. Am I thinking of that correctly, that would be 100% levy dollars as compared to what this motion is contemplating, which is only 33% dollars, if you like?
Yeah. So through the mayor to Councillor Oliver, you are correct. However, we will advise you of all of the standards that we will be out of compliance. And I think the one that is new since this was printed is the Service Ontario one that Ms. Taylor has spoken to, whereas we would be at risk of not being able to inspect prior to the offshore workers coming and not enable them to actually come to the farms as workers to harvest the crops. Unfortunately, that does put us at an economical disadvantage. So one of the main reasons for this particular NBI is to help support that. But back to your original question, it would be a direct reduction if we did not, if the board did not approve this particular NBI.
Thank you for that, Marlene. And again, maybe I'm not understanding correctly, but is this a new change just from 2017, you're saying? Because, I mean, we've always had, over the last number of years, had to inspect offshore labor accommodation. But this is a new initiative that will affect the 2018 harvest that we didn't deal with in 2017.
So through the mayor to Councillor Oliver, that is correct.
Okay.
So Service Ontario has put in some new recommendations, I think as recent as just the beginning of 2018. So although we had asked for this for other requirements, that's a significant one that has come forward since that time. There's additional inspections. We typically inspect all of them throughout the spring and summer, but prior to their arrival, my understanding is there are inspections that are required before the offshore workers are even able to travel to the respective farms.
An unfair question, Marlene, from me would be, given the option of the inspectors, which is a new proposal that doesn't currently exist, or the motion that's on the floor, what one would have, in your opinion, the least effect to what we need to accomplish in 2018? If you don't want to answer that, you don't have to. I just thinking of total services that we provide.
Through the mayor in speaking with Ms. Taylor, regardless of what the reductions are, we're looking at service reductions. So respectfully, we would seek direction from the board on what services we wish not to continue to
Okay.
provide or enhance, if I may, with this particular NBI to our community.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion? I know we've, Councillors, Mr. Sonnenberg?
Thank you. A very general observation. Councillor Brunton said it. Are we perhaps trying to do too much? Rita Kalmbach had a saying for this: we take care of people from the cradle to the grave. It seems that we are responsible for everyone's problems. No one seems to want to take responsibility for any of the ills in society, whether they're unemployed or whether they're ill or whether they're addicted or whether they're homeless. Are we expected to take care of everybody's problems? I know this is a very general question, but it seems we're headed that way where we have to be all things to all people, and I don't think we can afford it. So that's just a comment. I'm sorry. If anybody wants to respond, I would welcome it, but it seems hopeless. Thank you.
So through the mayor to Councillor Sonnenberg's, I would respectfully suggest we're not trying to do all for all people, although sometimes it seems that way. The services before you and the budget before you are all within mandated requirements. There's no additional programs that we're asking for within this budget that, would be nice to have or based on needs assessments of our local community, which is quite honestly what the new public standards are asking us to do, and we will be looking at that moving forward. These are all mandated programs, which at this point in time, there are targets that we are not fulfilling to their full capacity. And as our economics development increases in Norfolk County, which is a wonderful thing specifically to the public health inspectors, it does have significant added responsibilities for our health department.
I am ready to call the question. Any other discussion? You have heard more than once the motion on the floor to reduce this from an increase of 16.7 to 10%. Those in favor of the motion? 1, 2, 3. Those opposed? That motion is defeated. Let's continue with the budget from the Board of Health. Councillor Sonnenberg.
I posed a question earlier about the tobacco cessation program, and I'd like an answer, please.
So through the mayor to Councillor Sonnenberg, if I may, I'm going to ask Ms. Taylor, who's done some work for us, and she'll be able to answer any of your questions.
Okay, thank you, and through the chair to the Board of Health. The tobacco enforcement program that we offer employs 1.9 full-time equivalent staff, and that includes the 1.5 tobacco enforcement officers, as well as some administrative staff and the student test shoppers. The total budget is $163,600, and that is 100% funded by the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. The purpose of these tobacco enforcement services, it is to implement Smoke-Free Ontario strategies and support the modernization in an effort to reach Ontario's goal to have the lowest smoking rates in Canada by 2030, which is to 5%. It will support the implementation of the Smoke-Free Ontario Act as the legislation is passed and announced, and we'll be continuing to work with local schools, workplaces, and tobacco vendors to ensure compliance. As well as it protects the general public and workers from secondhand smoke, and it enforces the legislation regarding retail marketing and youth access to tobacco products. The tobacco enforcement team works with our youth engagement team and other partners to address health issues and the importance to them with regards to changing individual and community attitudes towards tobacco use and the tobacco industry and its products. It also works with our quit smoking services, which allow us to offer counseling and nicotine replacement therapies to our constituents. And we continue to work with both counties around developing and supporting smoke-free outdoor spaces and bylaws to protect residents from secondhand smoke. The question was raised earlier this morning around the effectiveness of the tobacco enforcement services. We do have to provide indicators or a report on certain indicators to the ministry as part of our accountability agreements, and we are able to say that we do provide 100% of the inspection services to our high schools, to the tobacco vendors. We work with our youth to assess whether or not vendors are selling to youth and compliant with that legislation, and we follow up on complainants as far as Smoke-Free Ontario Act legislation is concerned, and we do issue charges and warnings as required. The impact of not providing this service, so as I remind you, the service is 100% funded, and it is actually, the actual costs are within that 100% funding cap. But there are some legal ramifications to not providing the service, as we are mandated by the ministry to enforce the legislation. And there could potentially be sanctions towards the Board of Health if we aren't compliant with that. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I guess the most important question I have, how do we know that this has any success at all? Do we do surveys of kids who, have you quit smoking, or would you have started or not started, depending, because of this program? It's a very general, abstract type of thing to analyze. I don't know how you know if we're effective.
So
we do all the stuff that's mandated by the province, but I still see kids gathered around outside smoking, and darn it all, they're within 100 feet of the back door of Valley Heights High School. Cigarette butts from the door to their smoke hut. Now, is that really proper?
Mr. Oliver?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to be sure I understood correctly. I don't know whether Councillor Sonnenberg's question was just about the youth component or about the Smoke-Free Ontario program overall, but if I'm correct, Susan, on page 9 of the health unit's budget, we've got 3.93 FTEs, in other words, 4 people, and we spend $409,000 on that program, and we are spending almost $20,000 in levy overall, correct?
So through the chair, that is correct. The question this morning was around tobacco enforcement, which is a portion of the tobacco services.
Okay.
So the tobacco services overall include the tobacco enforcement, youth engagement, and tobacco control coordination. So there's 3 separate funding pots that come from that.
Yeah, that does answer my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brunton?
Well, this is a prime example where they say it is supposedly 100% funded, which it is not, okay? And I do not believe, and we've gone through this exercise, that I know when we talked about protocols, or whatever the word was we used, Susan, we had to go into high schools, we have to send some youngster into variety stores. We have to bylaw enforce when somebody's smoking in Langton. They have to send somebody out there by that time they're done smoking. All those kind of things that we have to deal with. I do not believe, and that's where I say we, and in my opinion, I think what we try to do is do too much, and that's why we're in the predicament we're in. We think we have to. Have I seen anybody from the province come down here and make sure that we have been in every high school, whatever it is, twice a year? Or gone into every variety store that we send some youth in to see if you could buy cigarettes? I don't believe the idea to me is you do the best you can with the money you get. But we seem to go overboard. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Oliver asked my very question, but we were just having a chinwag here. That net levy impact requirement on page 9, if we were to take the $19,600 out, that would be a 0 net levy impact. Then what would the ramifications be if that was deleted, Marlene?
So through the chair to the Board of Health, the ramifications of that would not impact the tobacco enforcement that's been described here. It would impact directly on our youth engagement strategy, and so it would impact on our ability to work with the youth within Haldeman and Norfolk counties to further this work.
Thank you.
Further questions? Mr. Wells?
Mr. Mayor, I don't have a question, but could I put forth a motion
Sure can.
for consideration by staff?
You may.
And it would be something like this. It doesn't have to be the exact words, obviously, but I think we have toyed with this for years, this problem.
Yes, we have.
And I'd like a letter sent to the Minister of Finance, I presume, or the Minister of Health. We, the Board of Health, have problems providing services for which we were to receive 100% funding. The ministry is not funding these provincial programs at 100%. This has been causing problems for many years for the Haldeman Norfolk Board of Health. We would like to notify the ministry that it is our position that we will only provide these services up to the level of funding we receive. Henceforth. Mr. Mayor, I think the motion that was on the board was fair, but I think we should, two things. I think this letter should go to Haldeman so they know what the intent is of the Board of Health. And secondly, the ministry should get some warning that we are not going to be continually funding these programs which are beyond our mandate. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That is my motion.
Okay, it certainly relates to the budget. I don't know if it's really a budget item, but you certainly read your motion. You wish to move that?
I do.
Okay, can I have a seconder, Mr. Sonnenberg, to members of council, and we can get Mr. Wells to give you a copy of that if you don't have it word for word. Any discussion on that motion? Anybody want to hear it reread? Mr. Height?
Speak to it, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, you may.
Well, I don't see the point of it, to be honest with you. It probably works with a whole bunch of other municipal partners. They send funding for 100%. Maybe it works in Brantford. Maybe it works in Niagara. It doesn't work in Norfolk. Why? Who knows why? There's lots of variables. Going back to them saying, oh, we're mad at you, you don't give us enough money because we allow it to go over the 100% funding is kind of pointless. I appreciate the effort, but honestly, it's a waste of a stamp. This council has a decision. We could set it at 100% and keep it that way. We don't need to beg the province. And I'd rather just save the stamp and the tree, Mr. Mayor.
Any further discussion on the motion, Mr. Wells?
Well, certainly if the ministry receives this letter and they have that same feeling that we're not concerned about what you do with 100% funding, at least staff and the councillors who sit around this table next year will be made aware of that.
Further discussion on the motion? If not, those in favor of the motion? 1, 2, 3, 4. Those opposed? Motion is carried. Any other questions to staff on this proposed budget? Yes, Marlene?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can we just seek clarity on that from a staff perspective? So if we're sending a letter saying that we're not funding anything above what's required, what is the directions to staff, or are we simply sending a letter for awareness? So we're just seeking clarity so we can proceed moving forward.
Mr. Wells, I believe it's awareness, but you can...
Thank you, we appreciate that.
Thank you. Anything else on this budget? Well, not hearing anything else. My plan, and I leave it up to council, is to, in a moment, recess the Board of Health. Certainly at the end of the budget session tomorrow or Friday, I'll give you an opportunity to go back at this. And of course, at the end, we will have a confirming bylaw for both the Norfolk County budget and the Board of Health. So if I hear no more discussion, I'm going to recess. Mr. Geisens? Thank you, absolutely. Page 18, the harm reduction program enhancement, it's a 1.5 FTE. Can you explain that?
So, thank you, Mr. Mayor. May I politely ask to have the question repeated? We were trying to
Yeah.
find page 18,
okay.
and in our efforts to do that, we didn't quite get the question.
That's okay.
So through the mayor to Councillor, it is for salaries and benefits, yes. So through the mayor to Councillor Geisens, this is actually the 1.5 FTE that was approved by the board that the ministry provided to Norfolk County back in the fall. So it is 1.5. 1 FTE was for a registered nurse, and the 0.5 was for a program assistant. That is correct.
Mr. Bratton.
Marlene, correct me if I'm wrong, the people that I have dealt with on that committee have been working there for years. Did we hire new people? We never hired anybody to look after that program.
So through the mayor to Councillor Brunton, you are correct. There has been staff working on that for many years. The scope of the requirements have expanded, and we have actually hired an additional 1.5 as per direction of the board with the additional funding that was provided by the ministry.
But they're not working in the harm reduction. The people on the harm reduction have been working there for years. I don't know what they were doing before that. So you moved them over into harm reduction? The new people you hired went where?
I'm going to ask Ms. Taylor just to advise of what the internal movement was with those particular positions, but they are increases.
But they're not increases on the committee, at least the last meeting I went to. Those people have been there for years.
Susan? Please.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So yes, we did in fact hire 1.5 FTEs. So we hired a public health nurse and we hired a half-time program assistant. The candidates for those the successful candidates were internal applicants, and so that left a vacancy within the community health team for the nursing position, and that was backfilled elsewhere. So those positions are new, and the staff are newly in those positions.
Okay, but they are existing staff that went into those jobs, right?
But there were existing staff who are working on harm reduction, and the existing staff who are working on harm reduction have been supplemented with the increased service levels and the increased staff.
Let me get this straight. The new people you hired are working someplace else within the health unit because, oh, never mind. No. Thank you.
Further questions? Okay, I'm going to recess at this point the health unit operating budget. I would suggest that we're getting close to 4 o'clock. This may be the point to wrap it up this first day unless I get some strong objection from Councillor Wells. Mr. Johnson, Kathy, any recap you want to do? I know today we didn't covered a lot of ground, but we don't, I have 2 items of reduction. I don't know if you wish to tell us where we are. I know it's here. I know where it is. Went from 3.3 to 3.1, but I wanted to leave that for you to talk about, but